the Colorado River Compact is a fundamental document that does take on kind of religious overtones or undertones, because it has, just like the Bible, it has Gospels, and those Gospels have been interpreted over many, many years, and they form the basis of what we're about to talk about today. So let's dive right in. We're going to talk a lot about acre feet. So how much is an acre foot? This room, 227,800 cubic feet, would be about 5 acre feet if you fold this entire room up to the ceiling. So that gives you kind of a visual depiction of how much water we're going to be talking about when we're talking about tens of millions of acre feet. This is the snake diagram. I won't bore you with this, but it's illustrative of, you see the Arkansas there, the basin we're in, and then you see the Colorado River, and everything west of the Continental Divide at some point empties into the Colorado River and makes its way down to the lower basin states. I'm going to talk to you about what I call the legal trinity of the Colorado River. Sticking with the religious theme, we've got the Colorado River Compact, the treaty with Mexico, and then we have the upper Colorado River Basin Compact that was signed in 1948. Now that's pretty much it. We're going to get you out of here because that's all there is to the law of the river. Wait, actually there's the Boulder Canyon Project Act, the Colorado River Storage Project Act, the Arizona v. California case, the Colorado River Basin Project Act, the La Plata River Compact, California 7 Basin States. I'm just going to keep throwing these up here. This is the body of law that rests on the trinity, the legal trinity, that we're going to go into kind of in-depth discussion about here briefly. Underneath all this stuff, or over it, depending on where you sit and what your perspective is the suite of environmental laws that was passed in the late 60s and early 70s, NEPA and the Endangered Species Act. So, without further ado, this is the law of the river. I'm going to touch on the stuff in the white font up there, and we're going to see if we can get through this as fast as we can. Does anybody recognize this? Shout it out. Coliseum in LA. This is why we have the compact. The reason we have the compact is Southern California was developing at a pace that was much, much faster than ours. And so, can you just take that? Let me just back up. The U.S. Supreme Court hears cases between states. And when when Wyoming sued us over the use of a river, the North Platte, the Supreme Court said, well, if both states apply the doctrine of prior appropriation, that's what we're going to apply in a case between states. So prior appropriation, first in time, first in right. The first people to develop get the water. These people were developing much, much faster than we were in the upper basin. Well, a very smart lawyer up in Fort Collins named Dolph Carpenter ended up recognizing that fact, and he said, if we wait for these guys to develop and the doctrine of prior appropriation applies to the Colorado River, we're not going to get to use any water up here. They will have all the water rights down there, and they will be senior. So he recognized we've got to figure out a different way, a better way forward, and he came up with this compact idea to apply it to water. Now, compacts had applied between states to separate, resolve differences on boundaries between states, but it hadn't been used to negotiate how much water we get to use until this compact. So this compact does some very important things. The first thing is it's equitable apportionment in perpetuity. It means forever. It doesn't mean that, they could have kicked the can down the road for 20, 30, or 40 years, but they decided that they were going to try and resolve this for their grandchildren's grandchildren, and here we are with it today. It establishes a hierarchy of interstate uses, establishes comity between the states, and allows development, storage, and flood control, which is important, especially to the lower basin. So let's talk about some definitions really quickly. You don't need to read these. I'm just going to throw up a map here that will explain these. The first thing is, this is the upper basin. You can see I think I have a laser pointer here, but I don't know how to use it. There it is. So up here in the upper northeastern corner of Arizona, that's in the upper basin. Now that's important because when we think about the upper basin states, we don't count Arizona usually. And there's an important reason for that, and we're going to get to that. The upper division is what we think of, and that's a definition in the compact. Now, on top of this, there are trans-mountain diversions, and the folks in the Arkansas are no stranger to that's no stranger to them. The state of Colorado takes out about a little over 500,000 acre-feet of the Colorado River Basin and moves it over to the Front Range. Salt Lake City does the same thing. The San Juan Chama takes water over to the municipalities in New Mexico, the big municipalities. And then about 90% of trans-mountain diversions out of the Colorado River Basin happen below Lee Ferry, which we'll talk about in a bit here. But it happens in the lower basin. California takes water over for LA and for San Diego, and then once it gets across the border into Mexico, Mexico takes the water and moves it out of the basin to feed their agricultural economy. So this is the cast and crew that negotiated the Colorado River Compact. Delph Carpenter is the one with the halo. And the reason we put it on there is because he was A, from Colorado, but B, the whole compact rests on kind of his theory and application of this doctrine of compacts. So basically the basis for this compact was this. The lower basin wanted some certainty that they would be able to develop and build a big dam to help them control the river and generate hydroelectric power. In order to get money from Congress, Congress said, you've got to go negotiate with all your states. If you don't settle those differences, then we're not going to give you any money to build your dam. And so the lower basin said, okay, well, we can get together and do that. And that was the impetus from the lower basin to come to the table. The impetus from our side was, as I suggested earlier, we wanted to develop at our own pace. So we all came together. They met in Bishop's Lodge, New Mexico, and they signed this compact. And they couldn't get to the point where they apportioned water to each individual state. The best they could do was divide the basin in two and then divide the water use, consumptive use, between the two basins. So they drew a line right here at Lee Ferry, Arizona, and it's right below where currently we've got Glen Canyon Dam for Lake Powell. So that's where they drew the line. There's the upper basin states and the lower basin states. And the upper basin was apportioned 7.5 million acre-feet of consumptive use. The lower basin was 7.5 plus 1 million acre-feet if they could grow into it, and that equaled 8.5 million acre-feet per year. So if you add, then Mexico wasn't dealt with because you can't deal with an international situation like that through interstate compacts. You've got to have the State Department at the table to do that, and we'll talk about that treaty in a bit. So this you do not need to read. Don't freak out. The Article 3 apportionment basically says what I just told you, but then also says, here's how we're going to deal with Mexico if we sign a treaty. It says we're going to give, first off, the system waters, and system is defined to mean the entire basin. And sometimes Arizona doesn't like to think that way. Sometimes they like to say, well, we don't think it really includes the tributaries when you talk about the system of the Colorado River. But that's what's the saying about putting a lipstick on a pig? But you can't change the compact just because you'd like it to be that way. The compact does refer to the system, and the system's including the tributaries. So it says that if there's a deficiency to Mexico in some treaty that we sign down the road, that's going to be borne equally by the upper and lower basins, and that in times of extraordinary drought, the treaty governs how we scale back how much we deliver to Mexico. So it's in vogue right now when you hear about the Colorado River Compact for people to say, including the Secretary of the Interior, who I heard down in Colorado Springs, to say, well, those negotiators had bad data, bad science, they didn't know what they were talking about. And that's debatable, I guess, but the record doesn't show that. The record shows that these guys knew what drought was. They knew what extreme drought was. In fact, in the record, this is text out of it, that says that they knew that 9.5 million acre-feet could be, in some years, all that was available in the basin. So that's one piece of evidence that they knew about extraordinary drought. The other is that this map was the map that Delph Carpenter took with him to the negotiations, and you can see that there are two reservoirs drawn on this map. One is what would be Lake Powell, and one is what would be Lake Mead. Well, you don't need reservoirs unless you need to control for times of drought. drought and harness that supply when there's surplus. So the record just doesn't bear out that these guys were crazy and didn't know what they were talking about, at least from my perspective. Now, because this map came from there's the two reservoirs that are drawn on there. This map came courtesy of Justice Hobbs, and I put up this blinking disclaimer because I don't want to be accused of plagiarizing anything from Justice Hobbs at any point. In any event, Article 3, apportionment. This is what these guys are going to talk about here in a second. The states of the upper division won't cause the flow of the river to be depleted below 75 million acre feet over a 10-year average. So that means that this is not a delivery obligation. We have compacts in this state where we have delivery obligations, and this isn't one of them. This says if you can curtail your use down to your 1922 water rights, then you have done all that you are obligated to do under the compact. And that's very important for reasons we'll talk about in a second. This just says that no state, it's an anti-hoarding provision, that you won't call for water if you're the lower basin, and you won't hold on to it if you can't use it up here. So what the compact does not do, it doesn't affect the United States obligations to Indian tribes. It doesn't impair present perfected rights. And you know there were lawyers in the room when they negotiated this thing, because it doesn't prohibit lawsuits either, although we've never had one to date. So 1928, so that's the 22 compact. 1928 was an important year. Some important things happened. Steamboat Willie came out, first animated picture. Penicillin, big deal. The big thing that happened in 1928 was the Boulder Canyon Project Act was signed. And it obligates the Congress to pay for the construction of Hoover Dam. And that's extremely important, because it was really the basis of the bargain that the lower basin wanted out of the compact. So California agreed to limit itself to 4.4 million acre feet. The act made congressional approval of the compact effective after ratification by California and 5 other states, because Arizona wasn't going to ratify this thing. They thought that their tributaries should be excluded. Their negotiator didn't get that job done, and so they were ticked off and weren't going to ratify the compact. And they were basically holding it hostage and holding this dam hostage, and Southern California didn't like that. So they told their legislators, let's see if we can make this happen. So Congress said, we will treat the compact as effective and ratified as long as California and 5 other states sign it and ratify it. So that happened. It also establishes that the Secretary is the water master in the lower basin, and since he's from Colorado, we've got to put his picture up there. It authorized the Hoover Dam and All-American Canal. And then it suggested that the division of the water between the lower basin states be this. It said 0.3 million acre feet to Nevada, 2.3 million acre feet to Arizona, 4.4 million acre feet to California. We'll get back to that. The second piece of the Trinity is the treaty with Mexico. It allocates basically 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico, and in surplus it can increase that to 1.7 million acre feet. In extraordinary drought, Mexico gets to be reduced in the same proportion as uses in the U.S. are reduced, so we kind of fight over what extraordinary drought means. And then this is a picture of the earthquake that hit down there. The last couple of years have been tough on them, seismology, as far as earthquakes go. And the reality is that this damaged their infrastructure so much that they couldn't take their 1.5 million acre feet. So we're currently discussing with Mexico ways in which they might be able to store water in the United States for their benefit in times when they can't take their delivery, in exchange for conservation measures that they will undergo down there in Mexico. So those negotiations are ongoing. Another thing it does, the next time you see a salt shaker, think of the treaty with Mexico. And the reason you should think of that is because by the time we all use this water up here in the upper basin, and then the lower basin uses it on their agricultural lands, the water that gets to Mexico is pretty salty. And it was so salty, in fact, that the Mexican government said, we can't work with this water. We've got to have a solution. You've got to give us something that's less salty. So they did that. And they established Minute 242, which is like an amendment or an addition, an appendix, I guess, to the treaty. And then Congress ratified the Salinity Control Act in '74 that took about 50,000 acres out of production in the Welton-Mohawk district. It lined canals like this. This is one up in Plateau Valley where my family's from. And basically it's money from Congress to line some of these canals and ditches so that it doesn't leach the salt out of the geological formation. These yellow dots show roughly where these salinity control projects are around the upper basin, and I thought it'd be helpful for you all to just see that project because some of our money that gets generated through this whole work is spent on salinity. So, $7.5 million to the upper basin, 8.5 to the lower basin, and then we've got Mexico down there. We can add in 1.5 million acre feet. You add all that up and you get 17.5 million acre feet. Now, that's great, but the 100-year historic average that the Bureau of Reclamation keeps says that we've only got 15.1 million acre feet on average. So this is where the tension is, and this is why this panel exists, is because people are nervous about what would happen if there's not enough money to, not enough water to meet the downstream needs, the flow requirement, the non-depletion requirement at Lee Ferry, and you know, what would happen? Would there be a call on the river, which is a call between a junior and a senior in Colorado? If you don't know about that, the term call is you're calling your division engineer, your ditch rider, to go turn off somebody's junior appropriation so that your senior right can be fulfilled. So this is Article 3A of the Upper Basin Compact. So we're into Part 3 of the Trinity. How are we doing on time? All right? Okay. So the Upper Basin Compact apportions the... So here's what happened. The Lower Basin had this suggested apportionment in the Boulder Canyon Project Act that I talked about. Congress said, well, we've paid for some projects down there because they went ahead and went through Congress to do that and had that suggested apportionment. Upper Basin, if you want projects, you've got to divide the water between yourselves. Each state's got to take an apportionment. So we sat down like adults up here in the Upper Basin and negotiated what those percentages would be. First off, right off the top, for that little sliver of Arizona in the Upper Basin, we gave them 50,000 acre feet and said, that's what you get out of your Upper Basin apportionment. Then we said, because hydrology is variable, we're going to use percentages up here instead of raw, a bright line acre foot number. So 51.75% of the water available for use in the Upper Basin is given to Colorado, 23% to Utah, 14% to Wyoming, and 11.25% to New Mexico. So if you apply those percentages to the hydrology, if it's a full hydrology, 7.5 million acre feet a year, then Colorado's at about 3.8 million acre feet that it's entitled to use. We're using right around 3 million acre feet, rough justice on these numbers. If you drop the hydrology down to 6 million acre feet of consumptive use available for use in the Upper Basin, then you get to 3 million acre feet, which is right about where we are. So this is where the tension is when somebody asks, a panel like this or their lawmakers, what is the amount of water that's left for us to use in the Colorado River? Well, it's a sliding scale. It depends on the hydrology, and that's why you get a range instead of a specific number. Okay, I just threw Gene Breitenstein up there because he was an assistant attorney general like I used to be, and he gets a halo just for the heck of it. Curtailment. This is what these guys are going to talk about, so I threw the provision up here. This says how we're going to deal with it. You don't need to read this, but curtailment, here's how the compact says we'll deal with it if there's a call on the river. It says, first, you've got to pay back everything completely and get in compliance with the 22 compact at Lee Ferry. That's number one. Number two, you've got to pay back all of your overuse if you're an overusing state. So if we're using more than our apportioned amount, then we or New Mexico or Utah or Wyoming have to pay back that amount first. So if over that 10-year running average you're using every year 100,000 acre feet more than you're apportioned, then That's 1 million acre-feet over 10 years. That's real water, and that's something that you would have to deal with on the front end. Next, if the overuse doesn't cover the bill, then you've got to go to the proportionate use of each state. So if we're using half, we have to pay back half. And then this is important. Present perfected rights are excluded from curtailment. Present perfected rights, who's heard of that term? Present perfected rights. Pre-22 rights is another way of putting it. Present perfected rights are the rights that were in place at the time of the signing of the 22 Compact, or the ratification of the Compact, if you want to be technical. And the Compact says that we're not going to mess with those rights. The Upper Colorado River Commission is established. It has a bunch of powers, and we're not going to go through those. Interstate projects. So if you would have told the commissioners what we're going to do here with this compact is we're going to take water from Flaming Gorge and ship it to the Front Range, they'd say, "What you talking about, Willis?" Because they didn't say in the compact that that's explicitly what they were trying to do. But that nonetheless is what a couple of folks are interested in. They're interested in taking water from Flaming Gorge up there on the border between Utah and Wyoming, and taking it across I-80 and down to the Front Range. And the legal mechanism for doing that they hang their hat on is the 1948 Compact, because Article 9 says that interstate projects can be built and that no state's going to be allowed to object to those, subject to a few conditions. And here those conditions are. The use of the project's water has to be within the using state's apportionment. So we have to have some wiggle room in that 51.75 sliding scale in order to be able to take this water. The second thing is the project's water is subject to the rights of the water users in the exporting state, so it's subject to Wyoming's water rights. And then the third is that users have to pay property taxes in the exporting state. Now this is all subject to, and any good lawyer will tell you, you have to read the entire compact together, the terms together. They have to be consistent if you can read it that way. Article 15B says the compact does not interfere with the state's power to regulate within its boundaries the appropriation, use, and control of water. Basically this says that Dick Wolf, our state engineer, still gets to call the shots over water, whether it's brought from out of the state or it's taken out of the ground or wherever it comes from. The administration of this water is not infringed by this compact. There are some subcompacts that were established because some of these rivers, as some of you know, they snake back and forth between the borders. So rather than try and guess at what the apportionment was on those individual streams, the negotiator said, well, we'll just go ahead and spell those out right now. So we negotiated, like adults, what we wanted as far as an apportionment goes, and the Congress said, okay, you get your money, and Colorado River Storage Project Act was enacted. And that let's just go through it. It's basically our bank account. It's our savings account for use up here, because we can have water in Lake Powell and we can release it as we need to keep that flow consistent with the compact. Wayne Aspinall gets a halo because he was in Congress at the time we needed this act to pass, and his predecessor, Ed Taylor, should get one as well. So, CRISP, as its acronym is referred to, created 4 big buckets: Aspinall, Flaming Gorge, Navajo, and Glen Canyon. So, and then there are a host of participating projects that many of you probably know more about than I do. But it also said that additional projects aren't precluded, and it established the basin fund that helps with some of the stuff. It helps pay for some of the stuff like the Endangered Fish Recovery Program on the Upper Colorado River and the San Juan Recovery Program down there. So while we were up here negotiating like adults and doing what we were supposed to do, in the lower basin it was anarchy. They had absolutely no scruples when it came to filing litigation. They started filing litigation in the 30s, and they didn't stop until the court handed out a decision in 1963. The court said that the Boulder Canyon Project Act apportioned all of the water in the main stem below Lee Ferry. So it basically said that 7.5, that first chunk, 7.5, that's of main stem water, which leaves a person to conclude that the 1 million acre-feet that I said they could grow into would be their tributaries. So Arizona thought, that's great, because we've always argued that we get the full use of our tributaries, and the Gila is about 1 million acre-feet, so that must have been what the negotiators meant. California said, well, hold on a second. First off, the next important thing that the court did was it said that even though that was a suggestion that Congress made in the Boulder Canyon Project Act, we're going to deem that to be the apportionment. So that's what you get. 0.3 to Nevada, 4.4 to California, and 2.8 to Arizona. And then it talks about surpluses, and then shortages are just supposed to be decided by the Secretary of the Interior. It's silent as to the tributaries except the upper Gila, and so Arizona says, hooray, we win! But who has more legislators in Congress than any other state? California. So California said, you can have money for your Central Arizona project, which takes water to Phoenix, but here's the deal. You're going to be junior if there's ever a shortage. So that was the pound of flesh that California extracted from Arizona on this deal. So that allowed Arizona to go ahead and build their Central Arizona project, and that's me next to one of the impellers. This is a lot of water that they move out of the Colorado River and through that canal that you can almost just see the water evaporating out of. So that's California depicted with Lucy there, and Arizona with Charlie Brown. Real quickly, Section 602A. Actually, I'm not going to cover this because John McLeod's going to get into the nitty-gritty on how the reservoir is balanced. But the only thing you should take away from this slide is Lake Powell's our bucket. That's our reservoir. And Lake Mead's theirs. So just remember that when John talks to you in a little bit. Recent events. I mentioned the discussions with Mexico. We've got Grand Canyon Trust versus Department of Interior. That's ongoing environmental litigation over the amount of releases that should be allowed to flow out of Glen Canyon Dam for the environment. There was litigation over seepage losses to the Cienega de Santa Clara down in Mexico, and the rest of this is basically, let's just go down to the next to last one there. Calls to renegotiate the compact or paper over the compacts. This slide shows you why that's not possible. You cannot renegotiate a compact that is the bedrock, the foundation for 80 years this year, actually, of law that came after it. And if you do that, you have to be able to address all of the structural issues that you would have to address with that. So that's my base. That's my basic take home on this slide. Is there's a lot that this all rests on in the Colorado River Compact. Finally, and I'm going to let it go here, California. California gets its water from two places: the Bay Area and the Colorado River. California was told by a district court judge up in San Francisco that this fish, the Delta smelt, said that they couldn't use those impellers that I was standing next to because it chews up the fish. So they had to shut down that source of water, and put a bullseye on Colorado. So all this is to say that we want to make sure we're diligent in monitoring what goes on around this basin. So believe the good news. Del Carpenter allows us to grow at our own pace. My boss, Governor Hickenlooper, gets to go up there because he's my boss. There's John Stolp in the audience. And Dick Bratton's your keynote speaker. There's Lee Miller. And John McLeod's picture looks like a mugshot, so I put numbers up on it. So that's all I've got.
Very good. Thank you.